On the type 3. Everybody.
Hello. Hello. Hi, everybody. Happy Wednesday to you all. Hope you're all having a fine day. So we've got, we do have 2 minutes, it's true. We probably have 3 more classes for Latin and Central American music stuff. We're going to get through Mexico today. We'll cover Brazil next class, and we'll probably do some writing kind of stuff the class after that. Yes? Okay, so a good question. I've answered it, but I will answer it again, just to make sure everybody's on board and knows what's up. So, no, it's okay. So please make sure you're listening so that everybody knows how this goes. So we will take like a little quiz kind of thing over Latin American stuff. That'll happen at some point soon when we're done with the things, obviously. Then, excuse me, I almost coughed directly at you. I apologize. Then, obviously, we'll get into rap and hip hop stuff. We'll be there for most of the rest of the year. Rap and hip hop stuff. Now, we will not. So I want to make sure everybody understands. We will not have a comprehensive final. A comprehensive final is what most people think of as a final, like where it's about everything we did this semester. We didn't do that last semester, and I'm not going to do it this semester, right? So there will be a test over Latin American, Central American stuff, and rap and hip hop. That test will be the last test that you take for the class, thereby being the final test, but it is not a final. Now, for funsies, depending on how much time we get, I do have a Extreme Jeopardy, which is a 3-round Jeopardy that is comprehensive for the entire year, which would be purely for fun. It would not have anything to do with, it would not be for anything beyond just like, you know, do a Jeopardy just because. So if we happen to have like a last day, I haven't looked, I'll be honest with you, I haven't looked at the final schedule yet. It's possible that we might have a test and then have another day after the test. Yeah, I know that the schedule sucks. But if it's one of those kind of situations where we end up with like a bonus day at the end, we'll probably do Extreme Jeopardy just for the hell of it. So, you know, maybe whoever wins will get some extra points that will mean nothing, but we'll get points. I don't know. We'll see. So that's kind of the plan. There will be at least 2 in-class writing assignments still to come. And there will be, obviously, a quiz over this stuff, and then a test over this and rap and hip-hop stuff. So there's still stuff out there to come. But your big projects, obviously, are done, and there is not a comprehensive final. So we will take the last test on whatever day the final schedule says. Fine. But that's just a regular test, just like all the others. You can still use your notes. It's the same. Okay? Are there any other questions about rest of year things? I do obviously have to kind of get done with things because the seniors have a different schedule, and there are obviously seniors in here. So we kind of have to be wrapped up. I think you guys have a slightly different final schedule. Yeah. So depending on how all that stuff works out, we might end up taking the test slightly earlier in order to accommodate the seniors, but we'll cross that bridge when we get to it. Okay. Anything else?
No, sir.
Easy with the sir. Okay. Tell me everything you know about Cuba. It's easy. Just tell me everything. It is an island. Got him. Missiles. Yeah, there are indeed missiles, and there is indeed coffee. Yeah. A boat? Sure is. There are cigars. That's true. Okay, what was Cuba initially a colonized by? Who were they colonized by? Spain. Yeah. They were a Spanish colony. How did it become not a Spanish colony? Huh? Who did we fight? The Spanish, yeah. So the Spanish-American War, which was started how? A boat did go boom. What was the name of said boat? The Maine, yeah, the Maine, the battleship Maine. Did anybody happen to like look anything up about that? It actually, believe it or not, I know it seems nerdy. It's actually quite interesting. There's a lot of controversy. There's a lot of conspiracy theories that exist around all that stuff. So if you're one of those types, you know, you can go out there and find all kinds of things. Yes, that is the ultimate conspiracy. Actually, it landed on the moon and then portaled and landed on JFK. That's actually how it happened.
And then it blew up.
Yeah. So.
Back through a portal on the moon and got transformed into a bullet.
Yeah.
And then got
That's what, yeah, that was the thing. Anyway, what was the relationship between Cuba and the United States like prior to the Cuban Revolution?
It was
Define.
like America.
Good for us.
American playground. Yes, an American playground. It was good if you were American.
It was like Las Vegas.
It was basically Las Vegas. How did Cubans feel about this? They made a lot of money about this.
Their economy
Why were they not the ones getting paid? Yeah, lots of organized crime. Yeah. And it didn't start that way, of course. Like, it kind of became that way as it went. So it got worse and worse for like everyday kind of people whose jobs were somehow connected to, you know, tourism and the service industries and all that kind of thing, right? So it's not that Cuba didn't like Americans being in Cuba. That made them huge amounts of money. It's that they wished that they were able to have more of that money because a lot of it was being, you know, kind of embezzled or skimmed off the top or not being fairly distributed, which led to what getting really popular? Communism, which in paper form makes a lot of sense from the, hey, We want more people to get more of a share of the money that we are all kind of, collectively earning. That kind of makes sense for us to try to, get more of that money. And people who came into power, this is where you get your Fidel Castro and your Che Guevaras and all those types, say, hey, what if we just became a communist country and we were able to benefit off of all this money that's coming in more directly? The problem with this was what?
America didn't like communism.
Yeah, specifically why? Why? Why didn't we like communists? Thanks. 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 Because communism was what? Well, communism. Well, it wasn't Russia at the time. It was. Well, it's a lot of things. It was the existential threat. It was the other, right? And the United States and the capitalist sort of West considered the Soviet Union and all the Soviet bloc countries to be the other great power that everybody was kind of afraid of and had like this diametrically opposed opinions to. And obviously we fought lots and lots and lots of wars about this. That's where we get all the proxy war things. That's Korea, that's Vietnam, that's Cambodia, that's all kinds of things. So yeah, right, Ukraine right now is pretty clearly one of those. Yeah, so
Just like that they didn't understand what communism was, or is it like?
So that's an excellent question. This gets into a lot of things. It's not so much that people don't understand what communism was. It's that communism was viewed as being like this massive cultural threat because it would have completely upended the system that we had. There's kind of a viewpoint of communism as being sort of purposefully anti-religious, which is kind of true, kind of not true. It kind of depends on some stuff. But it's more atheistic, certainly. And that was kind of viewed as a threat. Obviously, just the economics of things viewed this as a threat. And this wouldn't have been necessarily such a huge deal, except that Russia also had, lots and lots of nuclear weapons. And, so did we, obviously, pointed at each other. Yeah.
How was it anti-religious?
Communism, it's not explicit. So it's not like a part of communism that it is anti-religious. It's just in a lot of the ways it ends up getting expressed kind of ends up being anti-religious. This is true in most of the major communist countries. There are 1,000 asterisks that go after this. Russia is obviously well, not anymore. It's technically a capitalist country, but not really. Kind of oligarchy really is kind of the best description of it. But Eastern Orthodox Christianity is the main dominant religion in Russia. So it's not like it's irreligious. It's just that religion is kind of de-emphasized in a way that's different from the way a lot of capitalism, because capitalism isn't explicitly religious. It's just that a lot of countries that are capitalist end up having a religion kind of as a state religion sometimes or not. That gets complicated too. Yeah.
Elaborate on what you were saying. In a lot of communist countries, it is written into their constitution that it's supposed to be secular, but that secularness is taken to a further level.
Yeah. And there's different expressions of this, obviously. But all these things together basically kind of meant that communism and the Soviet Union were the great enemy. Okay? They were the people who we were fighting this existential thing against. Yeah, and that expressed itself in all kinds of crazy ways. Yeah, good questions all. I would love to have an entire week where we talk about all the ways in which this got expressed, all the things that this ended up doing, but that's way outside of the scope of this class. But maybe one of these days we'll see. Anyway, Cuba got kind of swept up in all of this after they became a communist country and sort of aligned themselves naturally with Russia. Russia sent a bunch of missiles there and wanted to point them at the United States. Why did they send missiles there? Yeah, because we had them in Turkey and Greece, other places too, but mostly Turkey. And we had our missiles pointed, right at Russia. And they were close enough that at the time there was no real way to stop those missiles if they were launched. There weren't really the kind of anti-missile systems that we have nowadays that we... Oh boy. Lasers and lasers and lasers and lasers. Lasers and lasers and lasers and lasers. Have you seen... You probably haven't been paying a lot of attention to the stuff coming out of Israel, but if you watch the anti-missile systems that Israel has. Those are like probably second. The Iron Dome, yeah.
There was a video I saw on Instagram of a missile getting intercepted out of the atmosphere.
Yeah.
Like in space.
Yeah.
Via laser.
Yeah, it's crazy. And that's like Israel's system is mostly just the American system, but probably like our leftovers. Yeah.
Yeah, they still use C-RAM.
Yeah, which is not a thing that, yeah. Anyway, so yes, nowadays we have the ability to shoot missiles down from space with like, you know, in worst case, other missiles, but usually nowadays, probably just actual lasers, space-based or ground-based or even airplane-based
Probably all
lasers or all of them, yeah. That stuff is, it's wacky. It's a terrifying world. Anyway, that wasn't a thing that existed in the 60s, and obviously having missiles so close to the United States and Cuba was a big scary deal. That's all the Cuban Missile Crisis stuff, blah, 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 blah. America continues to have a weird relationship with Cuba. We still have trade embargoes that are in place and travel restrictions. Although those are loosening, and in the last 10 years or so, it is technically possible for Americans to go to Cuba under some really specific circumstances, usually having to do with like humanitarian stuff. There have been some exceptions made for other things too, but you have to kind of get there. There are no direct flights. You can't really get flights from the United States to Cuba. You have to usually end up going through a second country, Venezuela, Colombia, something like that, in order to then fly to Cuba or some European place to then fly into Cuba. It gets complicated and weird. Maybe that'll change. You know, things hopefully will start to improve and all of that, and eventually the relationship between America and Cuba will kind of normalize, but who knows? Who knows how that's all going to work. Okay, there's two types of interesting music from Cuba or are related to Cuba. What is mambo? Yeah.
Cuban dance music from the 30s, 40s, and 50s.
Yeah, Cuban dance music from the 30s, 40s, 50s. What is it based on?
Swing music.
Yeah, it's based on American swing music. It's not the same as, but is super closely related to. It's basically a mix of Cuban folk music called son and American swing. Cool. Why was this a thing? Why was there mambo in Cuba in that time period?
Wasn't it because like all of the things that were coming into Cuba were from that time period? Because that's when the America took over and it never left.
Sort of, kinda. Not really the radio.
It was whenever Americans, it was like the playground, and that's what they heard.
Yeah. If you're going to go to a nightclub, you expect to hear whatever the pop music is of the day. And in the 30s, 40s, and 50s, when Americans were coming to Cuba to party, they expected to hear the music that they were used to hearing when they wanted to go out dancing, which was swing music. So all these Cuban bands started essentially learning swing music. And then over time, it kind of got mixed together with other more traditional forms of Cuban music. Boom, mambo. Mambo became popular on its own and was brought to the United States and was a thing. And especially that was brought to the United States because the Cuban diaspora, people who are trying to get out of Cuba after communism and the economic collapse and all the other bad stuff that started happening there. Remember, Castro, not a good dude, okay? Not a good time. Lots of persecution, lots of bad stuff. So people were trying to get out of Cuba. They brought, obviously, their culture, their language, their food, their music, everything with them in the same way that every other group of people that we've ever learned about in this class have brought all those things with them when they move someplace else. Mambo ends up in the United States and becomes a big thing later. What is salsa?
Salsa, wasn't that like Cuban and Puerto Rican immigrants in New York?
Yes.
Came up with that.
Yes. So salsa is not native Cuban music. It is made by the folks who immigrated from Cuba and Puerto Rico, kind of mixing mambo and some other kind of traditional Latin stuff with what is the big dance form that it mixed with? Do you remember? I mentioned it. Not bebop. It's good. It kind of happened around the same time that bebop, a little bit later. Not boogie woogie, disco. Yeah, salsa is really more of like a 70s thing, which really got started. There was early kind of salsa stuff in the 50s and 60s too, but it really became like the thing in the early 70s when disco became a thing. And we'll learn about disco
Salsa
soon
is
enough.
Belafonte, right?
Harry Belafonte was Calypso.
Oh, he was Calypso.
That's Calypso, yep.
But who,
It was made for two people
To dance with too, yes.
who popularized salsa?
There's a lot of answers to that, and it's not a single person. So the Palladium was the place where a lot of this dance style kind of started happening in the 50s and then kind of progressed from there. But different people, Tito Puente, who we saw that video when we learned about timbales, he was big into this. Desi Arnaz, do you know who Desi Arnaz is? Anybody ever watch I Love Lucy or know who Lucy Arnaz was? Okay. Which, if you know anything about TV or like women comedians or women in TV, you should learn about Lucy Arnaz because she's like the freaking coolest. I Love Lucy was the show that she produced with her husband, Desi Arnaz, who was a Cuban immigrant. He was a Cuban band leader, good singer, good songwriter, had a really like actually very popular, very hip band in New York. And it's a sitcom, a late 1950s era sitcom about this married couple and their friends. And Lucy is Lucy, and her husband plays basically a Cuban band leader, and they're married, and it's about all, it's a sitcom, so it's about all the dumb things that happen around that situation. It's actually legitimately hilarious. I Love Lucy, it holds up really well. It's very funny in lots of really like kind of insidious ways. It makes a lot of jokes that are still like kind of edgy and funny and are like still kind of, I don't know, it's just really good. It was because he was Cuban, they got dragged into the McCarthy era stuff. They had got dragged into the House Anti-American Committee because people thought that he was a communist, which he was not. He served in the US military and all this other kind of stuff. He got out of Cuba because he wanted out of Cuba. He didn't want to be a communist, but people thought that, well, oh my gosh, you've got this woman comedian telling jokes on TV and her Cuban husband who's a music person in the late 50s, early 60s. This is somehow or another, this can't be American. Right, so there's something bad going on here, so let's investigate them. And then of course it turned out that no, it was literally none of those things. They just happened to be super famous, super funny people who were awesomely creative and made a lot of money making a TV show. She owned Paramount for a long time. Just like, yeah, she literally owned Paramount movie and TV studios. Yeah, Lucy was an actual boss. The TV shows Mission Impossible and Star Trek both got started because she's the one who selected them to exist. So Star Trek exists because Lucy made it exist, which is wild. All the Mission Impossible movies that exist now exist because Lucy basically made those exist. Like, she's a beast and super fascinating. So anyway, her husband, Desi Arnaz, had an actual salsa band that was really popular, separate and apart from all this other stuff. So, he was kind of one of these people who helped to popularize salsa in the United States as well. There's a lot of things that kind of go into this. Anyway, that kind of went afield, but there's a lot of cool cultural stuff there.
So did Herb Alpert have anything to do with salsa?
Herb Alpert and the Tijuana Brass. So that's sort of the gentrification, a lot of this.
Yeah.
Herb Alpert is less, it's more mariachi and banda than it is salsa. And we're going to learn about that today.
Because I was thinking, salsa's popular, and right next to all my grandparents'
is whipped cream and other delights.
Yeah, Herb Alpert, Alpert,
and the Tijuana Brass. Yeah, it's much more.
Esquivel in there.
So, as we're going to find out, most Americans, shockingly, didn't have a whole lot of cultural knowledge about any of this stuff. So it all gets kind of lumped together as like the same thing, even though it's really, really not. That's nothing like modern day or anything, though, I promise. Okay, great. That answers all that. Hey, I want to watch this real quick, just because this is hilarious. So this is a band called Salsa Celtica. It's pretty wacky. It's pretty wacky. Terrible camera work. Thanks, Kyle. All right, so this goes for quite a bit longer, but as you can tell, this is kind of an interesting mix of things. So it is a halfway point between Celtic music and salsa. So this is like a Celtic reel mixed with a salsa kind of percussion and horn section. So let's see what instrument. Hi there. Let's see what instruments you can recognize here. What's this guy playing over here? What is that thing? It's a mandolin. Yeah, good. He was playing something before the mandolin. What was he playing beforehand? A tin whistle, a penny whistle or a tin whistle. Yeah, uh-huh. Then what's this? Banjo. What's this? Fiddle. Not a violin, but a fiddle. And so like in different songs that I've heard from these folks, like some of them are more and less Celtic or more or less salsa. So it is like they can actually just sound pretty much like a Celtic band too, which is kind of weird. Then what are these? These are what, sorry? Thank you. These are congas. What are these? Those are bongos, you monsters. He also had a cajon, is what that's called. We didn't learn about the cajon, but the cajon it's literally just box. Yeah, you sit on the box. It's called a cajon. It's kind of like a drum set in a box. Depending on where you hit, it has like kind of a higher pitch snare sound or a lower pitch kind of like bass drum sound to it. Cajones are actually super cool. And if you like learn how to play hand percussion, cajones are like kind of the best place to start because you can do a lot with them and they're not that hard. They're also not that expensive. Obviously you got a horn section, that's pretty easy. What about this guy back here in the back? This guy, what's he playing? What are these? It does start with a T. Timbales, yeah, timbales. Sorry if I missed it. Well, so if you remember, the same way that drum set is like a lot of things, timbales is a lot of things too. So timbales is the name of the two drums. They look like snare drums, but they don't have bottom heads. They don't have snares on the bottom, usually made out of metal. But the cymbal and the cowbell and the block and stuff that's attached to it, that's also a part of the timbales. So it's like a drum set. You don't say, oh, I see that you have a snare drum, a couple of toms, a bass drum, a selection of cymbals that you have there. You just say, hey, look, a drum set, right? In the same way, hey, look, you have timbales. And along with that is like all the things.
Is it a timbales set, or is it just?
You just timbales. It's just timbales. And it's just kind of assumed that timbales has got all this other crap with it too.
So there's not just one singular timbale?
There is, it's called timbalo, but you don't ever really see just one. It's at least two, and usually other crap attached to them as well. So yeah, there you go, good. And then obviously you got piano, bass, drum set. I think there was a guitar player too. Electric bass, yeah. Anyway, so I don't know, I just think it's kind of cool that weird stuff like that happens. Obviously, whenever the Cuban diaspora was going on, not everybody all went to the same place. And some Cubans went to the UK, And, you know, in the same way that people take their culture with them when they move, that culture took root, and you get weird bands like this that are hybrids between Celtic music and salsa music. There's actually a band kind of like this, based in Louisville, called Appalatin, which is a mix of Appalachian folk music and salsa band. I've heard them play live a couple times. They're pretty cool. They play at World Fest a lot, so if you happen to go to World Fest over the summer, you can catch them pretty easily. But they're based in Louisville, I think. But anyway, so if you can find that, great. Okay, so let's get into today's stuff. We're going to be talking about Mexico today. So, Mexico, which is our neighbor to the south, obviously gets brought up in the news a lot for various reasons, but most people know very little about Mexico, actually, especially its history and everything else. And I hope that maybe through this you might learn a little bit more about Mexico, the country. So, Mexico City is the capital of Mexico, and Mexico City is the largest city in North America. It's about 20 million people who live there, depending on where you stop counting. So it's a huge city, bigger than New York, bigger than LA. It's gigantic. It is also one of the oldest continuously occupied cities in the world. London has it beat by many hundreds of years, but there are records of the city that is currently now called Mexico City being fully occupied from prior to the 1500s. So it's old.
Don't they use the sewer systems from?
Teotihuacan, yeah. It's built right on top of that raided city, basically. So super old city, very historical city. It's got a lot going on there. Excuse me. There are 5 different Columbian civilizations that existed in the area around modern-day Mexico. Now, I need to unpack some of this here. Pre-Columbian means pre-Columbus, so prior to 1492, and all the Columbian exchange that happened after that, which is kind of a nice way of saying, yeehaw colonialism. But there are 5 entirely different civilizations that existed at different times in this area. So Olmec, Maya, Teotihuacan, the Toltec, and the Aztec civilizations. And those go back several thousand years. They didn't all happen at the same place or at the same time. It's literally different eras of civilizations. This is a thing that also kind of gets skipped over quite often in conversations about history, because our history has a pretty strong tendency to be Eurocentric and not so much about the whole world. But civilization in South and Central America is at least as old as what was going on in India and China. Maybe older, it's kind of hard to know. Obviously, there were cultures that existed in Mesopotamia and Sumeria that existed way before all those things. But when you're talking about this region, you're talking about civilizations that are about as old as the different Chinese civilizations and the different Indian civilizations that existed. Which is to say, a long freaking time, okay? There have been people living in these places in huge cities for a long, long time. A thing that very often gets kind of skipped over. So don't. Now, am I going to quiz you, or are you going to need to know all 5 of these civilizations? No. But, it would be good for you to know that this stuff existed. The Aztecs, which were the last group that existed in this area and were the folks who lived in this area when they started being colonized by Spain specifically, the Aztecs were a super advanced civilization. They had all the things, okay? What they didn't have, unfortunately, was gunpowder, which kind of became the thing that caused the difference. But it was a pretty advanced civilization. Obviously, it built some pretty big cities and did stuff. But the thing that they didn't have, obviously, gunpowder being kind of the operative thing that made it hard for them to defend themselves from people who had guns. So, in the 1520s, this area was essentially just outright conquered by Spain. And outright conquered, like military force kind of conquered. this wasn't really a colonial kind of thing at first, because especially the Aztecs who existed in that place in that time said, yeah, no, not super interested in y'all coming over here and trading with us. Don't particularly care about this. How about we just kill you instead? And like fought open warfare against the Spanish. This was different than like what had happened in lots of other places where colonialization was kind of a slow creeping thing. This was just war, just straight to it.
Didn't like Spain come and like to all the Aztec cities and like just murder anybody who stood in the way of like their goals?
Basically, yeah. So it started as a kind of a pretty horrifying war with pretty much everybody being equal until Spain started shipping like cannons. Like not just guns, but like cannons. And that's when things got, that's when it got real bad. And a lot of people died. So the Spanish didn't colonize the Aztecs so much as they just like destroyed them. Yeah. Now that is not. This is different than it is in the Caribbean islands. Most Mexican people who are from Mexico, are direct descendants from these people. Not so much the Spanish influence. After Spain was able to conquer this area and obviously brought lots of European kind of things to the area, a lot of native folks just kind of didn't give a crap about them, and there wasn't a lot of mixing of ethnicities in this case. Cultural, yes, there's a lot of cultural mixing here, not so much ethnic mixing. Having said all that, there's all kinds of things that go around with this. People from modern day Mexico have really unique genetics. They are kind of a unique sort of subset of humanity in the same way that different people from other places in the world are kind of unique, interesting genetic subsets of humanity. There's a lot of increasing stuff about, hey, I think Mexico is like a race of people in the same way being Caucasian or African or a race of people. It's genetically different in very slight ways, obviously not different enough to matter, but like unique, which is kind of interesting. And the reason for that is they are descendants of very, very, very old civilizations. And those genetics are different, and they're just, slightly different people. So this is the reason why Mexico speaks Spanish, is because Spanish people spoke Spanish. Shocking. This is also the reason why a lot of Mexico has a tendency to be very Catholic. Spain was one of the last major Catholic countries, meaning that the state religion of Spain was actually Catholicism. That's quite different than it was. France kind of was that too, but the French didn't really care. But the English were very, very anti-Catholic, unless you're in Ireland, that's a different story. But Spain was very Catholic specifically, so Christian, but the Catholic version of Christianity. There's lots of influence then from that kind of Spanish stuff, which is interesting. If you remember, I mentioned this I think it was last semester. Spain itself is also kind of unique as a European country because of what? Do you remember? Huh? Yeah, basically, Spain was a Middle Eastern country for about 1,000 years. It was conquered during the Moorish invasion in the 900s, about 500 years. And there's a huge Middle Eastern influence in Spanish culture. And if you look at, architectural stuff, if you look at the language of things, which is kind of interesting, there's a huge amount of Middle Eastern influence and Islamic influence in Spanish culture. And so because of all that, you end up with some really kind of strangely Middle Eastern influence in Mexico because it was a Spanish colony. So it's all kind of mushy and interesting and weird if you look at it long enough. This gets even more interesting because around the same time that Germans were starting to come to this region of the United States, Germans started to immigrate to Mexico as well. So German unification was happening during this time period, which was its own kind of thing when all of Germany started combining together to be one actual country. This is not Nazi stuff. This is pre-Nazi stuff. And a whole lot of people said, hey, screw that. We don't really want to play around with that. Let's move to other places. Obviously, the Midwest here is where a lot of German immigrants went, but a lot of German immigrants ended up moving to Mexico too. So there's strangely a very strong German influence in Mexican culture as well, which, depending on how much you know about music from Mexico, you're about to learn a lot about it. You're going to hear a thing that is basically Mexican version of German polka. And that may not make any sense to you until you hear it and you're wait a second, I know exactly what this. I've heard this lots of times before, because you have. The beverages that are made in Mexico are very much of a German style. Mexican beer is just German beer because they learned how to make beer from German immigrants. So like Mexican style beer is just German beer, which is interesting. A lot of, there's even some culinary things that are kind of strangely German influenced. The existence of cabbage in different actual Mexican cuisine. How'd that get there? German, got there from Germans. There's all kinds of weird stuff. Even some of the clothing things you're going to see in different kind of band, in mariachi and in banda stuff, looks kind of like German folk stuff, dirndls and lederhosen. That's because it is. That's because it is. It's influenced by Germany. So the big thing here is that we spend a lot of time talking about all the crazy cultural influences that the United States has on it. And we do. We have all kinds of crazy cultural influences. We are all descended from immigrants, just from different places and mixed together in interesting, funny ways. That isn't an exclusive thing, okay? That happens in other places in the world too, like, Mexico. Okay. So 1821 is when Spain actually gains its independence from Mexico gains its independence from Spain. And that was done mostly via war. There is also some diplomacy and things as well. But Mexico eventually became its own independent country. This is different from a lot of other places where, like, all the Caribbean islands got cut loose by their colonial power, sort of like gently. Mexico fought to gain their independence from Spain. Mexico became independent of their own volition, and eventually became a democracy. They were sort of a monarchy for a while, like a weird kind of like half constitutional monarchy, kind of like British style for a while. Didn't work because that is sort of a busted system. Ask the British. It doesn't really work very well. But eventually Mexico became a democracy and has been a democracy pretty much since 1917. So a democracy after the fact, or later than the United States was, even though they gained their independence not too long after the United States gained their independence, about 50 years after we became an independent country, Mexico did too. Okay, now you got your Alamo talk. The Mexican-American War, which started in 1846, this is your Alamo stuff, okay? This is when the United States decided we're just gonna go ahead and fight a war with Mexico. This war was almost exclusively just about land. It wasn't really about culture. It wasn't about like, oh, we're trying to fight for right or wrong. This was straight up territorial expansion. America said, look at all that land you got. We want it. And then essentially just went to war with Mexico in order to take that land. Mexico lost about 50% of its territory to the United States. Mexico was gigantic, okay? It's still big, big country, but it was gigantic. We're talking all of the American Southwest up to about Colorado and almost all of California was Mexico, was actually like a part of their country. We took that land by going to war with Mexico, okay? Who had a question here? Yeah. So you can find maps about this. It basically, pretty much, all of Texas, most of Oklahoma, lots of Nevada, lots of obviously Arizona, New Mexico, Southern California, basically all the way up to Colorado. Utah, parts of Utah, like a lot, a whole lot. So this war is what resulted in the United States pretty much getting their final boss of Manifest Destiny completed, where they owned pretty much everything from ocean to ocean. Between the Louisiana Purchase and the Mexican-American War and then the Spanish-American War, where we got a bunch of islands, this was the time period when America was like, we want all the land, just all of it. We'll fight them all. And if you throw the War of 1812 in there, where we basically fought the Canadians, at that point we pretty much made, by this time period, America was the shape that it pretty much was in, except for Hawaii and Alaska, which we stole Hawaii and we bought Alaska. So, yeah. Okay, so in the 1910s, 1920s, the Mexican Revolution happened. This was essentially to overthrow kind of the king of Mexico. It's complicated, not really a king, kind of a king. It's a thing, but the end result of the Mexican Revolution was Mexico emerged as a democratic state. So it is now a full democracy and is the third country in North America besides the United States, Canada, and Mexico. Yeah.
Two things. One, isn't there like a load of corruption up in
Okay.
the government? Like,
Yes.
More than there.
Yes. So, I appreciate your qualification there, because in a lot of ways, to have a government is to also have corruption. Like they're not one-to-one, but you get one, you kind of get the other two. Is the Mexican government more corrupt than the U.S. government? Yes, it is. Why? So this is the thing you hear a lot about, and I'm not going to get super into all of this, but the basic thing here is that there are what they're called cartels. The term cartel is just like an illegal business. And the only reason why they're illegal is because of what they're producing. And what they're producing is drugs, okay? And those cartels are making drugs and thereby making lots and lots of money selling those drugs to mostly the United States. Not exclusively, but largely to the United States. The vast majority of illegal drugs that come into the United States come in and are produced in Mexico. Not exclusively. It kind of depends on what you're talking about, and it kind of depends on other things too. Because some things just don't grow in Mexico. Opium doesn't grow in Mexico. It grows in Afghanistan. So, it gets complicated. But a lot of this is happening, a lot of the corruption in Mexican government by the drug cartels is happening because Americans keep buying illegal drugs. It's complicated.
My second question is kind of just random, but why are Canada and U.S. relations so good?
They aren't always. The Canadians burned down the White House. Don't let them forget. That's not a joke, by the way. War of 1812, when they were still a British colony, Canadians invaded Washington, D.C. and burned down the first White House. Never forget. Yeah. So we aren't always super friendly with Canada, okay? Right now, we happen to be pretty chill with Canada because of lots of cultural things. We're not that friendly with Quebec. If you know anything about the French Canadian movement, they don't like America very much. So you can't paint too broad a brush here. But in general, Canada has aligned itself more frequently with the United States than a lot of other countries, except for maybe England would be the only, like the UK would be the only other one that is like more often on Team America. Pew, pew, pew. Okay. But to make this super clear, Mexico is not like anti-American, okay? Mexico and the United States are super important trade partners, and I don't just mean like illegal drugs, right? There's an awful lot of stuff that legally ties the United States and Mexico together. They are partners, not enemies. It just happens that they have a shared enemy, which is all these corrupt drug businesses that exist mostly in Mexico. But they wouldn't exist in Mexico if they didn't have a buyer in the United States, right? So like, and this is the part where most people like lose sight of that. They're like, oh my God, all those drug things, that's all so terrible. That only exists in Mexico. It doesn't only exist in Mexico. It's just they're the ones that are close by. And that's where most of the drugs are coming from. They lose the other part to that is they're coming here because people are buying them. If there was no market for them,
Then they wouldn't be making them.
then they wouldn't be making them, right?
Economics.
Yeah, like, I mean, it's complicated, and it's not so cut and dry. It's not good guy, bad guy stuff, okay? It's not like that.
Nothing's black and white.
Yeah, nothing is like that. Now, this does go to the other big thing is most people now only hear about Mexico when they talk about people getting out of Mexico. And if you've been paying attention in this class so far, we've talked about lots of diasporas, right? There's been lots of times when people have gotten the hell out of wherever they were. You can't eat potatoes anymore. Get out of Ireland. Oh God, we don't like this whole German unification thing. Get out of Germany. Oh no, the economy collapsed. Get out of Jamaica. Oh no, Cuban Revolution, and now Castro is bad, 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 bad. Get out of Cuba, okay? Oh no, Jim Crow laws exist. Get out of the South, right? Like, you have to kind of, and we haven't even talked about like Italian immigration, which is also a huge deal too. I mean, all these people are doing normal people things. Oh God, I don't know if I can take care of my family if we stay here. Get out, go someplace better. It just usually happens that the place that is better is the United States. Not exclusively so. People travel all over the place. They escape to lots of places. It's just, well, the United States offers a lot of things to a lot of people. And that has traditionally made the United States better. Not just because we get some like frickin' banging food out of all this, but because culturally we become a mixture of everybody who was here, right? And that traditionally ends up making people who have lots of different perspectives and therefore have the ability to work together better. And then when you work together better, you can make more stuff, you can sell more stuff, you can have, you know, a more unified kind of culture. This is why America is America in a lot of ways, okay? This isn't some kind of like pie in the sky dreamy crap. This is like objective economics, okay? It's just what it is. Anyway, we hear about Mexico the most nowadays because that's where most immigrants are coming from. Because the situation in Mexico is horrible. Not for everybody, but for a lot of people. And the reason why it's so horrible is because of the violence caused by all these different drugs. You know, those people are trying to get basically control of local governments. They're doing that sometimes through just straight corruption, and sometimes just by, hey, I got an idea, let's just kill them all. Let's just kill all the people in charge, and then we'll be in charge. And then now we can just make all the businesses in this country, in this little town, instead of making whatever you made before, now you make meth. Congratulations, welcome. And, you know, that kind of thing. Am I making light of this? No, I am not making light of this. This is real, it's terrible, it's awful. But if you're in that kind of situation with your family, and you're like, I don't know that I can guarantee the safety of my family, your response would be, time to get out. And you would go wherever it's closest and safest to go. Now, this is a super complicated issue, and I am like super speed running through it, okay? But understand that on the individual person level, when you're talking about people who are getting out of a place, you are talking about people who are doing that exclusively for the benefit of their family and nothing else. The exact same way as we've been talking about all these other people who have immigrated as a part of a diaspora, okay? It's the same. It's the same reason. We're all humans. We all want the same things. Take care of our family, try to make a better life for ourselves and the people we love. That's it, okay? Now, writ large, this is a giant, crazy, thorny issue. And there's a lot of gray area. There's a lot of what's right, what's wrong. It's complicated, okay? And I'm not here to say what is right and wrong. I don't know. It's way over my head. But understand that on the individual person level, that's the situation, okay? And people are just trying to make lives better. Now, what's interesting is in the same way that all these people who have immigrated from different places in the world always don't just bring themselves, they bring their culture with them. This is where you've seen a huge increase in Mexican culture and its influence in the United States. This is not by the way, some people frame this as like a cultural invasion. That's real stupid. I mean, I guess it's not stupid if you look at it in the same way that every other immigration group has been a cultural invasion. And in that way, well, okay, sure, I guess it is. But like, it's not unique. Okay, the United States is literally one gigantic cultural invasion after another. Remember, England invaded first, okay? You know, we set up all these things, all these colonies here when there were other people here first, okay? So, you know, we're all immigrants, unless you're, you know, have a Native American descendant, and then you're the one who should be asking, what the hell are you people doing here anyway, okay? That's why we all have allergies, right? Can't freaking breathe, because we're not supposed to be here, right? Anyway, so it is what it is. So yes, the culture is changing. Is it changing because of influence from Mexico and other Latin American countries? Yeah. Is that bad? No. And even if you think it's bad, you can't do anything about it. The culture will change because the culture is always changing. You all use all kinds of crazy ass words that I've never heard before. I mean, it took me forever to figure out that Riz is just charisma. That's a culture change, right? You all can speak a language that is different than your grandparents. You can communicate to each other using a language that your grandparents would have no concept of what you just said, no cap, right? So look, culture change is inevitable when we have generational change. New generation of kids, new culture. Congratulations, that's how it works. This is just how it has always been and how it will always be. So, my perspective, and hopefully the perspective that I can offer you here, is to understand that, yeah, these things are changing in the exact same way that they've always changed, and they always will change. And what culturally is being now incorporated into the United States? Because it's interesting. So, this is obviously where my opinions about music come into play. Because obviously, this is a music history class. If this was a culinary history class, let me tell you, this would be a very different kind of topic. But, you know, oh, of course it exists. Biogeography, the movement of people and how their culture influences geographic spaces. You can get actual degrees in that stuff.
Correct.
I love Mexican.
Yeah, right?
Or Tex-Mex, because it's not
But,
genuine.
well, in the same way that none of these things are genuine. Do you think you're getting actual Italian food?
No.
No. You're getting Americanized Italian food, and it rules, right? Are you getting actual Indian food? No, you're getting Americanized Indian food, and it also rules, right? So, like, hey, just, you know, understand that, of course. All these things are Americanized, and that in no way means they're bad. Have you had a taco? My God.
I love tacos.
Glorious.
I'm actually having
Okay. So, mariachi this is the thing that most people associate with Mexican music. It's actually not what you hear the most often, but is what you associate with Mexican music. Mariachi is old, been around for a long time. Mostly came in and started to develop in different local areas with the Spanish in the 1600s. Huh? Do what? I was not around. Unfortunately, I was not around for this. So really the origin of mariachi is in Jalisco, which is this state here. This one right here. Yeah, Mexico has states, same way the United States has states. Canada, provinces. Mexico, states. So Jalisco is this one, and that's where mariachi is from. 27? I could be wrong. You could count them. I don't know. I think it's 27, though. I mean, you have the internet. You could look it up. What do you need me for? Okay. So mariachi is based on kind of inconvenient, 31, okay, is based on something called son, which if you're paying attention, we just learned about Cuban music. That's also sort of the traditional style of music in Cuba. Cuban son is different from Mexican son. The word son is just the word for song in Spanish. Okay? So basically, it's just song is the type of music is song. Not a great name, but it is the name. Yes. But mariachi is a mixture of traditional kind of folk music that existed from the Aztecs and all the previous civilizations, European music, and some African influence as well, because When the Spanish came, they also obviously brought slaves because that's the thing to do apparently. So mariachi is kind of a mix of all three of those things. What makes it interesting is that it's not really a dance music. Mariachi is not really dance music. You can dance to it, and people do dance to it. Mariachi is really almost an art song. It's an art type. So in the three things we've been learning about, folk music, pop music, and art music, mariachi is actually more of an art music than it is the other two, which is interesting. It's more like composed. Like it is like you can be a mariachi composer in the same way you can be a classical composer, whatever that means. So it's meant to be more of a orchestral type thing than it is like a dance music. Again, you can dance to mariachi, and lots of people do dance to mariachi, and it does kind of also have like a folk music role too, but it is considered more of an art music type than it is the other two things, which is kind of interesting, kind of different. Instruments, so you're going to need to write this down. So yeah, trumpet is a big one. You usually have at least 2 or 3, sometimes a lot more trumpet players in mariachi. And mariachi trumpet playing is a style all to itself. It's freaking cool, but you kind of got to learn that specifically. It's different. Violin. Mariachi bands have usually 2, sometimes way more violins. Sometimes they're almost more like orchestras with the number of violins that you have. Guitar on, so the big bass guy, you usually have at least one of those, sometimes more. It's in your notes from the instruments from before. Vihuela, which is the little 5-string guy, which also should be in your notes from the instruments from before.
That's the rhythm.
That's the rhythm one, Guitar, just like regular old guitar. Usually it's like the classical style nylon string guitar type is what you see. Not so much the, acoustic 6-string, steel string type. It's more the nylon string type. More closely related to like flamenco guitar than it is to like cowboy guitar, right? And then weirdly, harp. So you get a lot of harp in mariachi. That's coming from the Spanish influence too. Yeah. Oh, it is Wednesday. We're at 40, is that right? And that's pretty much it. No drums. So we'll listen to some mariachi when we come back from lunch. Cool. Yeah.
You said that it has influence from.
Absolutely.
Is that like is it recorded whenever we first
So, as you can imagine, there's no audio recordings of this. And which is fine because written music wasn't really a thing. It's all oral tradition stuff. So a lot of this ends up being not so much like music in the same way that like Indian classical is like old music that we have record of. It's more like here's a folk song that has been passed down, that has made it from all the way back then to now because of being passed down to the oral tradition. So it's more like that. It's not so much the actual like music type itself